Every company has difference makers, the people who go above and beyond what's required. This podcast is dedicated to the people who challenge the status quo and make good companies great. Today, we're sharing one story from one company in our effort to inspire others. And welcome to Difference Makers. Today, my guest is Nick Stein. For over 40 years, Nick was a cameraman, editor, director, writer, producer, and showrunner in nonfiction television for all four major broadcast networks. It was his work on National Geographic's Border Wars show that would change his life forever. The time he spent on the U.S.-Mexican border eventually left him with a form of PTSD and eventually led him to meditation and mindfulness. Today, he brings a unique style of teaching mindfulness to a variety of populations and institutions. Using his strong communications background, Nick helps people start and maintain a meditation practice by emphasizing a logical, practical, and learnable nature. He calls his approach strategic stillness, and under that banner, he shares his hard-won knowledge with CEOs and key executives in a multiplicity of industries. Nick is also the author of a new book called Mindfulness as a Second Language, published by Goalkeeper Press. It is my great pleasure to introduce Nick Stein. Hi, Nick.
Hi, Jim. Thanks for that lovely introduction.
Well, I think the first question that anybody will have for you is, how did you get into television?
Well, I got into it early. I was very, very fortunate. I went to a high school which actually offered video production. And the equipment that we used back in 1972, which dates me immediately, was just incredible. Black and white, of course, what they call half-inch reel-to-reel. Was actually called a Sony Portapack. Wow. And I remember that when it was offered to me and I met the teacher and I was just excited as I could be, I remember thinking to myself right then and there, this looks like an incredible opportunity. If I could learn how to use this gear and learn how to tell stories, I probably could use it like a magic carpet and just fly around the world and meet all kinds of interesting people and tell all kinds of interesting stories. And I don't know why I had that epiphany as a high school senior, but I did. And I was 100% right. I continued in it through college and then got my first job right out of college in local news, WBZ-TV in Boston.
Oh, very familiar. Channel 4.
Got into the news department, which is, a great training ground for nonfiction because, as they say, the news waits for no one and you've got to work fast. And you got to work well. So it just never, ever, I never regretted the decision. It was always exciting. It was, I'll tell you the downside in a second, but it was always for somebody who has a short attention span and a lot of curiosity. If you didn't like what you were doing, wait 5 minutes because you'd be doing something completely different, right? And so all of that was true. And I worked cameraman and editor for years and associate producer, director, writer, until finally I really got to a tier what they call series producer or showrunner. So it's been a fabulous career. I've been retired from television for about 4 years. And I won't say it's for everybody. There are a couple of things that are tricky about it. One is most of us are freelancers, okay? And what that means is you don't have a steady job. Your last gig, could it be your last gig? You never know when your next gig's coming, or you often don't know. So it's not for the faint of heart who need a nice check every 2 weeks. And so that's one thing. And the second thing is also, it's very exacting. I mean, I work mostly in cable, and the cable networks contract with production companies. So I worked with production companies, many of them for all the networks that you mentioned, Discovery, A&E, History Channel, Smithsonian, PBS, National Geographic. And as time went on, it seemed like the budgets were getting smaller and the time frames were getting shorter. So they wanted almost twice as much at half the cost. So those are the kinds of pressures that we have too, which a lot of people have in business as well. So we share that in common. So, it was the greatest career I could imagine, and doesn't mean there wasn't a lot of pressure.
Regarding border wars, because that's really what I want to get to, your crews gained unparalleled access to law enforcement units patrolling the border and the contested areas of that border. And it was an instant success. Border Wars came out as the highest rated premiere in the 25-year history of the channel, if I'm not mistaken, and became its highest rated program for some time. And now you're retired from television, right? And I guess the question is, do you ever miss the adventure or adrenaline that came along with working on a show such as that? So, and I mean, like, you were right in the throes of everything.
Well, that's a good question. I don't really miss it because it took its toll on me, which we'll get into later. But yes, we were embedded with all manner of law enforcement, starting with federal law enforcement with a group called Customs and Border Protection. A lot of people know they're called CBP. And Customs and Border Protection have three, they're like a trident, right? They have three spears. One is the land legal ports of entry, where the men and women who are the officers there, have to regulate, legal traffic of every kind, commerce and people moving back and forth. But they also have to try to catch the bad guys and the drugs and all that. So that was one area we were in. The second area was with the Border Patrol, who was sort of better known, more famous, if you will. They work between the ports of entry and try to stop any traffic that's coming in that will not go through the legal ports of entry. And then they're both supported by air and marine operations, which is literally boats and helicopters and airplanes and everything like that. So we worked very, very extensively with Customs and Border Protection, all three branches. But we also worked with DEA. We also worked with ICE. We also worked with all kinds of local police departments and sheriff's department. Really, anyone who was along the border that was in law enforcement, we got embedded with. And our reputation grew, one, for being, upstanding citizens from National Geographic who didn't have a political agenda or axe to grind, that we just wanted to report on these people's jobs. Mm-hmm. That made us very welcome in all sectors. Then when the ratings came out, that made us very welcome in all sectors because we were doing something for them as well. We were telling their story in an accurate and non-biased way. And they need their story told, right? It's such a political hot potato down there that people project their own feelings as to what they do and who they are. And you literally, based on political bent, you could think they're Nazis or you could think they're clowns, and it's everything in between, right? They're none of that. They're hardworking civil servants with a very tough and dangerous job. And we wanted that to be told. And so we embedded so deeply that it was quite dangerous and quite the adrenaline-filled life. And as I guess the best way to do it in a short amount of time is that we traveled with them, right? We patrolled with them in vehicles, of course. Many times we'd get in a vehicle and everything would be quiet, and then the radio would go off and be at a 95-mile-per-hour pursuit of some kind, of pursuing all kinds of people with drugs and people, So we were in vehicles a lot. Obviously, we rode on the back of ATVs, amazingly. And I had cameramen on the back of an ATV holding on to the belt of the Border Patrol officer as we're going through the desert, chasing people or trying to cut people off or trying to do something with drugs and illegal immigrants.
Now, the first few times that happens, does it not just rush to your head, what the hell am I doing here?
Yeah, it does. I mean, there are times when you think, I always made a vow to myself that I wouldn't die for ratings. Well, I got awfully close to breaking that vow a number of times, including the worst time when we were in a Black Hawk helicopter that went into a canyon, literally into a steep canyon in the middle of the desert near the New Mexico-Arizona border. And we went to hover to film the agents on the ground, and we went into a complete spin like a top and started going down inside a canyon.
Oh,
How we survived, I'm not quite sure, but according to the co-pilot, he said that the pilot had to do everything right and nothing wrong in 2 seconds, which is pure instinct. And we survived that. So, and it's actually, I write about it in the book, right in chapter 1 in the book, because, you know, we sort of, me and my crew sort of felt like we were living on extra time after that. It was like, we really should have died right there in an awful crash, but we didn't. And we've been very grateful ever since. And I always sort of felt that was sort of a demarcation point between, you know, the first part of border wars and then the post-crash part of border wars. So.
Nick, 4 years of that, bearing witness to tragic levels of human suffering, and on both sides of the badge, really, it led you to a bad case of burnout. And I'm quoting you. And you're very public about this. Being away from home for so long also caused distress on your marriage and your personal life. And I know it's quite an epic tale. And since we have a little bit of time, can you tell us your story and how you came eventually to mindfulness and meditation?
Sure, and I'll try to condense it because it's a long story in the sense that a lot of different aspects to it, and of course I write about it in the book, but I also have lectured about it. I use it in my teaching, because what I try to get people to understand is that if I can end up with a meditation practice and get the benefits of mindfulness, anybody can, right? For a couple of reasons. One, I didn't believe in it at all. I'm sort of allergic to new age anything. I don't know about crystals. I don't know about chakras. I don't know about, you know, a lot of the stuff was never my bag. So when I needed help, it had to be logical. It had to be science-based. It had to make sense to me, right? So the reason I present my story, like I say, there's 2 reasons. One, I got in a lot of trouble, a lot of mental, emotional trouble. And the secondly, I didn't know how to get out of it. And I certainly wasn't going to try anything ooey gooey, hippy dippy, or whatever you want to call it. So that's what people need to understand, because a lot of people have a fear that it is not the way I teach it. It is not the way it sometimes comes across. So that's why I tell my story. So here's a quick version. So like you mentioned, I had 40 years in the business. The crowning glory of that was this incredible hit show, Border Wars, for my favorite client, which was National Geographic. I'd done work for them for decades. It was an instant hit, as you mentioned, and it was a show that sort of then ate my life. Because when you come out of the gate as a huge ratings hit, they just want 10 more shows and 10 more shows and 10 more shows and 10 more shows, which means you never are home. You're always on the move. And I was going between the border. We'd shoot for 5 or 6 weeks. I come home for a week or 10 days. I go to New York, where we're editing the show. Then I go down to Washington, D.C., where National Geographic headquarters are, but also the headquarters of Customs and Border Protection and DEA and all the other federal agencies. So as a result, I was making this loop. So part of the burnout came from this nonstop, you know, itinerant job I had, and very, very little time at home. So then we're down at the border, and not only we're having exciting adventures and full of adrenaline, but we're also seeing just incredible human suffering, that of likes of which I wasn't trained to see. You know, my crew wasn't trained to see. We didn't go through the academy. We didn't learn how to do law enforcement, but we were in it. And I'm talking, and this is a little intense, but I'm talking about pulling dead bodies out of the Rio Grande River, men, women, and children. I'm talking about people who were accidentally pulled out of drug cartel tunnels that collapsed on them because they were, you know, so hastily made. I'm talking about people lost in the desert for days and have to be rescued by the teams that we were embedded with, literally rescued and with medical interventions, or they would have all died. One big group I'm remembering right now, south of Tucson. I'm talking about children who have drugs taped to their bodies who get stopped, as they try to come through the ports of entry. I remember one story about a grandma. She was probably 80 years old. And she was desperate for money, and she had children who were in bad straits, grown children who were in bad straits, mental illness, autism. I don't know. I can't remember the story, but it was bad, and she had no money. So somebody convinced her to go into Mexico, leave her car with them for 3 or 4 hours, come back, get the car, ask no questions, handed her keys and say, you just drive across the border, because who's going to suspect an 81-year-old grandma of anything? Well, the dogs don't care what age you are, the drug sniffing dogs. And they start doing their thing. And next thing you know, she's pulled out of the car is put up on a rack, they rip it open, the drugs come out, and this was really heavy drugs. This was not marijuana, this was methamphetamines, or it was cocaine, I can't remember exactly. Anyway, she was busted bad. And here we are interviewing her, knowing that she's going to die in jail. So this is the level of human suffering. And some people can say, well, it's their own fault. Well, if you're desperate enough and you think, anyway, it goes on and on. It's gray area after gray area. And we watched it all. I'll tell you one more story. This is very intense. We were in El Paso, and as soon as we got there, they told us about the Cadaver Initiative. So what the hell is a Cadaver Initiative? Well, it turns out that any dead body that came across through the port of entry, which they did on a regular basis, because if they were involved with the cartels and they were killed or tortured or tortured, they couldn't be buried in Mexico because their enemies would attack the funerals. You see what I mean? Families and so forth. So they were often sent to El Paso to be buried in El Paso with other relatives in El Paso, right? So, because Juarez is on one side and El Paso is on the other.
Right.
So if there was any sign of torture, which was uncommon, they would take them aside and examine the bodies very closely for intel about the cartels. A lot of it had to do with tattoos. A lot of it had to do with other things that were tells. Mm-hmm. So as our law enforcement people were trying to get any intel they could as to the operations, they would examine these tortured bodies. So we watched bodies coming out of body bags that had no fingers. I won't even go further into all the things that a tortured body looks like. But, so you film it, and there's part of you which is like, you're doing your job, right? I mean, you're asking questions and you're filming, you're getting sound. And, sometimes it's only afterwards you just stop and, my God, what have I just witnessed? So that just, the cumulative effect of that over 4 years, you don't even know what it's doing to you until you start to get a little shaky and exhausted and a lot of other sort of symptoms that you don't have.
Right. Wow. How are you coping? Well, tell me how did you find mindfulness and meditation first? Obviously you weren't coping well without it.
No, it wasn't coping well at all. All right. Well, the story continues in this regard. So now I'm in the field a lot. I'm traveling a lot. I'm away from home a lot. And then suddenly a wildly unexpected thing happened. We were in McAllen, Texas, working on the 6th season of Awards, and we're getting up to 50 shows, which is a huge amount of television to do in less than 4 years. Mm-hmm. We started getting crazy emails from our colleagues back in Washington headquarters at National Geographic. Well, the short story is many people don't realize that for the first 25 years of National Geographic Channel's existence, they partner with Fox for investment, distribution, ad sales, and the business side. And there was always a firewall between Fox and National Geographic's editorial, because this is National Geographic. Who in the world would tell the National Geographic what to film, what to write, what to photograph? I mean, it's one of the most venerable institutions, worldwide institutions there is. It was started in 1888, so it's incredible. Nevertheless, National Geographic Channel's business partners, Fox, said, we'll read the fine print. we're the majority owner. The ratings are good, but not good enough. We're taking over the editorial side. So they took over the editorial side overnight, and dozens of people began being fired. So as a corporate matter, it was sort of blood on the carpet, you know what they say? And so I'm talking about legendary producers, vice presidents, executive producers, graphics artists, editors, I mean, it was unbelievable. And so we started getting these frantic emails while we were in Texas telling us this story. So that's the background. Then I come back to LA, and they've already installed a new Fox CEO and a new Fox president who were really alien to the culture that we had there, because they were kind of reality TV folks. And we don't do that. And bottom line was, I thought I'd be fired like everyone else. And I thought the show would be canceled, and that'd be okay, because I'm a freelancer, and I'd move on to the next project. And 50 shows, my God, that was enough. Except they saved an exquisite torture for me. The new president decided he loved Border Wars, loved the ratings, obviously, thought it was such a great show, that he decided that he would renew it for 10 more episodes. And yet he knew he could make it better. So he replaced me as the showrunner with some young man about 20 years my junior, hotshot, kid. And then I wasn't allowed to quit because two reasons. One is I had to train my replacement how to do my job. And I had to take him to the border, introduce him to everyone I knew, and vouch for him.
Yeah. So my first instinct, if I'm you or anybody's probably first instinct is, take this job and shove it, right?
Exactly. And that's what I did. So I wrote a letter of resignation. And then I was told by some of my allies just to hold tight because it was such a fluid situation. But the next big thing that happened is our number one connection with Customs and Border Protection, who was a top public affairs officer who I was working hand in glove with for years. Wonderful man. He basically told National Geographic that the Customs and Border Protection Agency wouldn't work with them, would not continue to cooperate with National Geographic if me and my team weren't part of the new team. Why? Because we were their comfort zone. They knew us intimately. They respected us. We followed the rules. We never strayed from what we promised them to do. And they didn't trust these new people. So if I had quit, about 30 or 40 other people would have lost their jobs because the show would have been canceled. And I'm talking editors and associate producers and writers and sound men and cameramen, and you go on and on. So under the pressure of not wanting to ruin many people's lives, I reluctantly went back and had the most horrible final season, working for a couple of guys I did not respect, who actually did things to the show which ruined it and made it more like a reality TV show, and the ratings suffered and the whole thing fell apart. But I fell apart with it. So as I'd say in my workshops, my life continued with guns, drugs, money, violence every day, and adrenaline. Only now, instead of thinking I'm being Mr. Hotshot producer, now it's mixed with anger, bitterness, a sense of betrayal, anxiety, and depression.
Difference Makers podcast is powered by Verity Search. Verity Search is a different type of executive search firm. With industry insights and access to data unlike other firms, Verity serves as a trusted advisor to its valued clients. Some of the key services include strategy planning, research, marketing, prospect identification, qualification, and recruitment across all markets and geographies. If you'd like more information, please check out the website at veritysearch.com.
But I think that the answer to how I got in such a bad shape was this really twin tower of the field, the real, secondary PTSD you can get from doing this kind of job with this huge corporate, tectonic shift, which affected everyone I knew and then affected me in a way I could never have predicted. And then my marriage started. My marriage had been falling apart because I'd been gone for, I figured, roughly 70% of 4 years.
Wow.
So that, wasn't good. So by the time Border Wars ended, I miraculously got another job. It was a miracle. It just came out of the blue. And it was a job in Montreal, Canada. And they called me in the middle of a heroin raid. It was one of the funniest moments. We're chasing people when we're busting out a heroin house. And I get this phone call, and I think it's my boss in McAllen, Texas. And I go, hello? And I hear this voice going, bonjour, monsieur? Monsieur Stein? And I go, yes. She goes, hello, this is Elise from Pixcom Productions in Montreal. How are you today? I said, I'm fine. And we're just, raiding heroin houses. And she goes, oh, have I caught you at a bad time? I said, no, but maybe we'll talk later. Very funny. And then I ended up taking the job, which meant I left for 6 more months. So I didn't go home, because if I'd gone home, I'd be a divorcee, sure, because we were such a hot mess. And then my father died right at that point.
Oh my gosh.
Right before I went to Montreal. So I'm a freaking mess. I am not good. I'm burnt out. I'm brokenhearted, and I'm in grief.
And you went back to the show against your will in the last year to save 30 other people, put some more pressure on your shoulders, right?
Yeah.
My gosh.
Yeah, the whole thing was, you couldn't make it up. I mean, the whole thing was like, a bad movie. So, so I get to Montreal. I'm still a mess. I'm faking my way through the new job because they don't know me. So they don't know the old me. They just they took me at face value. And I don't know. I don't think I did a good job for them, but I got through. And then my therapist, who I had needed, and was a wonderful man in LA, we were Skyping together, and he kept telling me about mindfulness and meditation. And I kept saying, come on, doc. I mean, please. Isn't that breathing thing? You got to breathe a certain way. You're always breathing a certain way. He says, no, Nick, you don't really seem to have the right idea. You need to read this book. And the book was written by John Kabat-Zinn, who I now know, who is also known as the father of, in kind of a funny way, the father of secular mindfulness. So what does that mean? It means that he was an MIT trained molecular biologist, for starters. He was also a beginning nascent Buddhist, American Buddhist, which there, of course, are plenty of them. And he was at a retreat when he suddenly realized that this was such a valuable human quality that we all have, and a human practice that we could all do, that if it stayed purely in the Buddhist silo, it would be a huge barrier to most Americans, right? It'd be exotic, it'd be religious, quote unquote, religious. So he knew in his gut that he wanted to expand it into the real world. And so long story short, he ended up working in a hospital, and he got all these doctors to send him these patients who were chronically in pain, doctors could hardly help them any longer. Back pain, headaches, agoraphobia, depression, you name it, physical and mental pain. No one was having much success with him. So he started working with this population in 1979. There's a documentary about it, actually. Bill Moyers made a great PBS documentary about it. And he said famously to them, which is, words which I like to tell people right away. He says, look, I can't take away your pain, right? I cannot, your doctors couldn't, and I can't either. I have no magic pill for this. He said, but I can change, we can, working together, change your relationship to the pain, which you realize is a pretty fundamentally profound thing. And it's not a panacea, and it's not a magic wand, but it's a practice which makes you you can fundamentally change your relationship to your thoughts, because your pain are thoughts, right? The sensation itself is a sensation. It's only in the brain that it's described as something unpleasant and painful. So it doesn't mean you can do completely mind over matter, but you can certainly go a long way to living with a condition which was driving you mad before. Now you live with it and you practice with it and so forth. So that's the book I read about that. And that's when I started to meditate. And that's when I got fascinated with it. And sure enough, I was in terrible pain. And I decided to try it for 1 week. Literally, I do it 7 days in a row, I think 10, 15 minutes a day after reading about it and getting some better sense of what meditation really is supposed to be. And after 1 week, I wasn't cured, but I sure felt this tiny ray of hope that my life wasn't over. And that was enough to get me to another week, which got me to another week. And then the rest is history.
I actually dabbled in it a bit since you and I met, and my wife talks about it, and she read a book. What's the book by the TV anchor?
10% happier.
10% happier. So she read that book, and she's been pushing it on me for a few years. But I was like you, like, come on, I don't need that stuff. I'm not gonna. But the more I've gotten,
gazing, there are all these pejoratives around it. They think you're in a trance. They think you're doing some selfish thing. But I'm here to tell you, none of that is.
One of the things that I heard and I read is you are not your thoughts, and it's almost like you're splitting yourself into two and observing yourself quietly. They say the fly on the wall thing, right? But if you can see them, then you are not them, and that's deep. That's really deep. So it's like attention training, here and now, stillness, observation, awareness, right?
Yeah, all those ideas are part of it. It's an amazing thing about a meditation practice. It's on one level, it's wildly simple. I could describe it in 5 words. Sit, close your eyes, pay attention to your breath. When your mind wanders, come back to the breath. That could describe the whole thing. But it's a door, if you will, that opens to just layers and layers and layers of profound realizations, insights, a sense of knowing yourself like you've never had before. It's like an acorn and an oak tree, So in terms of what some of the things you mentioned, right? You are not your thoughts. And the way I tell people is, look, when you really examine your thoughts, and you have any kind of objectivity about them at all, you have so little control over them. You don't know where they come from. You don't know where they go. You don't know where they bubbled up from. I tell people, here's a quiz for you. Tell me what your next thought will be.
You're asking me?
No, I'm asking you or anybody. What's your next thought?
More coffee.
It took a while, right? You had to use your vision for it. You don't know what your next thoughts are going to be. I don't know what my next thought's going to be.
I did draw a blank. I had to think of something. Yeah.
So thoughts turn out to be fleeting, wildly temporary, incredibly impermanent, with often an unknown origin, with an unknown exit, flying at you at 100 miles an hour, taking you into a world of not just thoughts, but stories. They're little stories, right? And you start down this little story, and it reminds you of another little story, which reminds you of another little story. Next thing you know, your thinking process is taking you to Peru and to the grocery store and to your emails. And how much control is that? Now, again, meditation doesn't solve the problem, because that's not really we don't call that a problem per se, because it's a human condition. Right? This is how our brains work as Homo sapiens. We have thoughts, the mind has thoughts, and the brain has thoughts, secretes thoughts the way your mouth secretes saliva, or your pancreas secretes hormones. So you can't fight it, you can't banish it, you can't suppress it, and all you can do is deal with it in a new way. And that new way is to recognize them for what they are. Don't put so much store in everything you think just because you thought it. Loosen your grip a little bit on them. Let them come and go. Don't, what it's like to perseverate. You know what it's like to get a hold of a thought and just repeat it over and over again. Well, meditation can help you.
This is therapy to me. I'm telling you right now. There have been some moments in my life, and I'll be really transparent. I've had some moments in my life where I've gone through some painful events, And those thoughts come to me randomly, and they're unwanted. Like I don't want them. And so I fight them. But then, like you said, there are times it'll get a hold of you. And like you said, next thing I know, I'm on a world tour of these painful memories that just make me feel like crap. And, it's like, I read something about that one time. I said, oh, picture a stop sign. And, just, you can't stop that videotape. So what you're saying is let them come, but have a different relationship to them. And that's part of your book, right? It changed your relationship to your own thoughts.
Yeah. And again, it's not a panacea, and it's not easy. Why? Because the meditation exercises are in preparation for what? To make you a better meditator? No, it's to make you a better person when you're not meditating, right? So you're practicing this thing called mindfulness on the cushion. Your meditation is the practice of mindfulness, what I call concentrated mindfulness, in which you train your attention to be where you want it to be. And also you begin to then see what it's so hard to focus on the breath, right? Or a body sensation or sound. There are all these things you can use as an anchor. And you find out right away that it's really hard to put your attention and keep it where you intend it to be. So the first thing you see is your mind pulling you away from where your intention is. Like, horses just dragging you away and sending you up into the tree of the branches of stories. So when you wake up from that wandering mind, whether it's 10 seconds or 2 minutes or 15 minutes, you realize you're not doing much but closing your eyes and just having the same thoughts you had when your eyes were open. You then come back to that point of focus as a training exercise. And in fact, people think they're failing. They can't stay focused, right? They say, I'm no good at this because my mind races all the time and I can't stay on the breath or can't stay on whatever the focus is. And I'm failing because my mind wanders. And we turn the whole thing around. You're not failing, you're being a human being, right? It's not easy to stay focused on one thing. It's really hard, it turns out, because you're a human being. Then when your mind wanders, you don't beat yourself up for it and you don't make it a pejorative. I tell people to smile, because when they realize their mind is wandering, they've seen the power of the mind to do whatever it bloody well wants to do. The old mind has a mind of its own. And you come back to your pre-chosen focal point, and you're then in that regard building your muscle of mindfulness. You're literally training your attention, which you can see has amazing beneficial aspects to it in business and relationships and everything. Because if your mind is constantly wandering and you can't pay attention to anything, like most of us can't because of these things, these phones.
Yeah.
So your attention training, and that's a big thing. You're not failing if you have thoughts. And if you try to suppress them and banish your thoughts, like you were saying, no stop sign, it's like putting a log on the fire. Because you will then your thoughts will come harder and faster with less control, and you'll think you're a failure all at once if you try to clear your mind. So that's the number one lesson with everybody, is get that myth out of your head, because you wouldn't believe how many people believe that's true. Like 9 people out of 10 say they can't meditate because they can't clear their mind of all thoughts. And then we come along, people like me, and go, well, you got it all wrong.
My daughter said the same thing to me last week. She said the same thing. I can't do it because I can't. And I'll make sure she watches this. I think what's really cool and what I've really learned, and a lot of people will learn by reading your book, is that you're not mindful. Meditation doesn't ask us to clear our mind or to suppress thoughts, but to observe them, right? And feel the presence of your own body and see your thoughts. And how liberating is it? What you've just shared with me is liberating to me. I can tell you that. And I know a lot of people in the mortgage business, which is the business that I focus in helping companies staff up. And as you can imagine, the amount of volume that's gone through the mortgage industry today is record highs, record low interest rates. Companies can't get loans done fast enough, and everybody's working major overtime and 7 days a week. And And these people are stressed beyond words because the demand is so high and you're constantly have customers you're letting down left and right. And man, I just hope so many of my colleagues and the people that I serve, I'm going to direct them to this podcast. Nick, I'm going to direct them to your book for sure.
Well, maybe we can get together on a big Zoom call and I can give them the whole spiel with the slideshow and everything else.
That's a great idea.
That's kind of how I do it these days because of COVID. All my teachings on Zoom, and I've literally had as many as 100 people on board, and I have a very robust slideshow and with the graphics and words, and then we meditate all through it. We set it up and then we meditate and we meditate, and I bring people up in a very slow, easy one, add some stuff. So, it's kind of a remarkable that I can stay in my home and help so many people, but it's very, very, very gratifying.
So how do you stay inspired to continue this practice of mindfulness and meditation? How do you keep it moving, and what inspires you to teach it to others?
I meditate every day. Listen, I don't meditate like some people do. I know people who meditate twice a day, 20 minutes. Sometimes they meditate a lot longer than that. I'm feel like Joe Average. I'm your average guy. Meditates about 15 to 20 minutes a day. If I don't have time, I can make it 5 minutes. I mean, I'm a huge believer. It's not duration, it's frequency. It's like you wouldn't imagine going out into the world without having brushed your teeth, right? And some people use dental floss, right? Or we joke about the fact that you really shouldn't go out in the world without good mental hygiene. And sometimes you call it mental floss. So, and at 5 minutes, I'm literally serious, 5 minutes a day, if that's all you can muster, that's fine. And it's better to try it every single day. And if you miss a day, don't worry about it. So my point is that if you try for 7 days a week, you may get 4 or 5 in there successfully, right? If you try to be cute about it and try to do it on the weekends, for an hour or something, 1, you'll fail, and 2, you won't do it for months at a time. So there's all these hacks to make this a new wholesome habit. So that's one thing for everybody in a practical term. In terms of my own interest in it, it just continues and continues. It's as cutting edge as modern 21st century neuroscience. The amount of science behind this thing now it's blown up. Because people really want to know why the brain reacts the way it does to mindfulness. And they put them, scientists all over the world, but the most famous one in America is Richie Davidson at the University of Wisconsin, Madison, Wisconsin. And he's famous for this stuff. And he puts people in these fMRI machines, which is a functioning magnetic resonance machine. And it lights the brain up, right? You can do different things and different parts of the brain light up. And you can go into one of these tubes, not everyone can do the tube thing because of claustrophobia, but these meditators can go in there, novices, intermediate, veterans, and Tibetan lamas, like serious meditators, right? And they can do an experiment. Here's one experiment. They're looking at a mirror, which is reflecting the image of a little video TV behind them. So they can look this way and see an image. They don't know what they're going to see. So the scientists put on, say, an image of a baby in distress/crying. Now, every human being on earth will have a reaction to that, right? They'll have a reaction that lights up part of their brain. Well, heavy meditators have a similar reaction. There's no difference in their reaction. The difference is when the image goes off, how quickly do they come back to the state they were in before, right? They recover faster. They have more resilience. So this can go on and on. They put a little laser on their leg that burns a little bit. Won't really hurt them, but it's not comfortable, right? A little like a pinprick, And with people who don't meditate or novice meditators, they get that a couple of times and their anxiety levels go really high, waiting for the next one, anticipating the next one. With heavy duty meditators, they just, once the stimulus is over, they recover, they go back to where they were. And then they have the same graph, but then they come back. and then you or I might go up and stay up. So there's a
Maybe
fascinating amount of
maybe
science,
me,
you know.
probably not you.
Yeah.
You seem to be somebody who is very at peace. There's a
Well, you'd be
peacefulness
surprised.
about you. It's hard to describe, but you can see it, you can feel it. There's an aura of peacefulness around you, Nick.
Oh, thank you. We all people in my business, people who are meditators, people who are teachers, always say, "Well, ask my wife." You know,
Mhm.
so there's all kinds of levels, but we're all still very human in all of this.
Mindfulness and meditation can be intimidating to a lot of people. I think there's a mental barrier with some folks that maybe people have about misconceptions that you talked about earlier, you alluded to earlier. Um, how do you overcome that? How do you make it more approachable so that people understand it's not as intimidating as it may seem? Is there something that you would share with somebody?
It's sort of my specialty, because most of the people I teach these days, particularly, are adults, and they are beginners, if you will. I'm not even beginners; they're skeptical. As Dan Harris says, they're fidgety skeptics.
Mm-hmm.
As you mentioned, I have taught a lot of law enforcement. Well, you haven't lived till you've walked into a room of 65 veteran detectives, Cambridge and Boston police departments, and them you're going to learn how to meditate. I mean, now we're really talking about Daniel and the lion's den, you know? So my job is to break through, and as quickly as possible, all of their misconceptions. And part of it to do it because I have street cred. The years with border wars, the years of being embedded intimately with these cops makes me, I can walk in the room and almost everyone in the room has seen border wars, because cops love border wars because it's what they do, only it's more exotic, right? If you're a cop in Cambridge, you know, an ounce of cocaine, you know what that feels like. If you're in Laredo and you 45, 100, 200 pounds of cocaine, that's a whole other level, right? So they relate to it, but it's really interesting to them. So I walk in the room as a guy who knows some stuff, and I just hit them over the head right away. One of the things I said, and I didn't realize I was saying it, but now I use it in my teaching. I said, listen, I know you guys, only I use an expletive deleted. I use an expletive. I know people. I use the language that you understand. I know you people, and I know that your mind is like a neighborhood you wouldn't want to walk through alone. And you right away, you see these guys and women going, oh boy, this guy knows who we are. And I said, now, let me tell you something. If you think this is soft and hippie and you're looking for gurus or swamis or incense or sitting on the floor listening to, you know, flute music, I said, I'm not here to give any of that. And here's what I'm here to do. I said, if you walk through a neighborhood alone in your own mind, it takes courage. It takes a tremendous amount of courage to go face to face with yourself and see the circus that is your brain, and deal with it and confront it and realize how intense it is in there. And don't beat yourself up, because it's just as intense for the guy behind you and the woman next to you. We're all the same. We're all in the same boat. And finally, I kind of say, if you want to take an image of some exotic Eastern icon figure, instead of thinking of a guru with a long beard and a turban, and I put up a slide of a samurai warrior. I go, there's the guy you can relate to. It's an amazing image of a samurai in contemplation, right? So I have my trick and my ways, and I've had a lot of success, and there's nothing more gratifying to me than having these officers and agents come up to me and say, Nick, you know, I'm doing it.
What about your book, Mindfulness as a Second Language? How can people get your book?
Okay. It just came out about maybe a month ago. It is a really interesting situation where I was approached by a publisher who does a series of books called As a Second Language. So this publisher who had saw me speak and came to one of my classes, she said, "You're writing my next book. It's going to be Mindfulness as a Second Language." I said, "No, I'm not." She said, "Yes, you are." I said, "No, I'm not, because I can't do that." And she said, "Yes, you are, and I'll show you how it's done." Long story short, 2 years later, I've got this book. All of the books have a certain format for tonality. It's definitely for people curious who want to begin. It's good for anybody, actually, because you go back through the foundational stuff is always important. So it's on Amazon right now, and you just click, send it to you, and it's as simple as that. It's so far, many people have bought it. We had a book launch with over 100 people. We have many good reviews. So it's been very exciting. And I never thought I'd have a book ever in a million years, just like I never thought I'd do meditation. So the journey continues.
Well, thank you so much for being so generous with your time and giving us an opportunity to really get a glimpse into what real meditation and mindfulness is. You've got quite a story. The one thing that I can say for myself is I've identified that I'm not different now. And I think a lot of other people out there that watch this podcast will understand that as well, that we are all the same and our brains all work the same way. And getting control of that is just so powerful and so liberating. So, Nick, I just want to say thank you so much for this podcast. Really, really enjoyed it. Get out there and get that book. Man, thanks a lot, Nick. Thank you so much.